Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Chuck McDonald. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Science. Before starting, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which Carleton is located is the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. This is the first in our ACE EDI series, and I wanted to, really, I guess, welcome welcome everyone to this particular event. I wanted to say I know some individuals know this about me, but I'm going to say EDI is very, very important to me. I am let's say, very privileged white male, but I wanted to emphasize that I'm not. My interests are more than just in myself, and so just within my family. To give you an idea, I have nieces and nephews that are Jewish. I have nieces that are Muslim. I have a uncle who's a Anglican bishop. I have some cousins that were raised as Hare Krishnas originally. I have a number of members of my family that identify as LGBTQ, and my wife is actually an immigrant. And I care and love all of these people. And for me, EDI means that all of these individuals, I think that they should have the opportunity to flourish who they are and as who they are. And so I think that for science in particular, this is something that I want, not just for my family, but for everyone's family. I want everyone to have those kinds of opportunities. I think it's really critical for us. I think it's critical for us as a discipline and a subject. And so I'm thrilled that Rowan has been able to take up this particular role within our Faculty of Science to lead many of the EDI initiatives. These, I think, are critical to our future and are very, very important to me. And so I'm thrilled that this is the first in our series of ACE EDI events, and I will turn it over to Rowan.
Thanks a lot, Chuck. So I'm very excited to be here to welcome you to our first ACE EDI event. So ACE stands for Awareness, Collaboration, and Engagement. And EDI, of course, is Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So when Chuck first approached me about this role of Assistant Dean EDI, it was a great honor. So thank you, Chuck. But I was also struck by the possibly huge scope of this role. Because as a physicist, a scientist, I have lived experience of EDI-related challenges, and I know they extend from being a student all the way through to being a senior researcher. And I also acknowledge that the challenges that many other people face are not the same as those that I've faced. So the published literature demonstrates pervasive EDI deficiencies at every life stage of a scientist and indeed an academic. And these groups, so members of underrepresented or disadvantaged groups include, but aren't limited to, women, Indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities, members of visible minority and racialized groups, and members of the LGBTQ2+ communities. So when I first took this role, I asked myself, what does EDI mean to me? And what concrete actions can I undertake and work with others to undertake to affect change? So the first thing we did was form a committee in the Faculty of Science with representatives from across the faculty as well as from student and trainee ranks. So I want to acknowledge the contributions of that committee to organizing this event. And during our first meeting, this committee introduced themselves by saying, what does EDI mean to you? And what one thing would you do to advance EDI at Carleton? And everyone had their own wonderful, insightful answer to both questions. And they formed a tapestry. And I imagine this as guiding us as we go forward in our work to advance EDI at Carleton. So this is going to be an ongoing event series that will take place through the year, organized by the Science EDI Committee. So this is the first event, and I'm thrilled to have these 5 panelists here today. I'd like to thank Michelle Barbeau, Melissa Chi, Martin Marnov, and Sarah Siddiqui from the Science EDI Committee for helping organize the event. And in the Faculty of Science office, I'd like to thank Jesse Cartwright, Katie Elliott, Rima Matter, and Valerie Paraboom. So we're very fortunate to have with us today 5 outstanding panelists from diverse backgrounds to bring their expert perspectives and lived experiences to this discussion of Let's Talk EDI and Science as we start the conversation in these ACE EDI events and work to identify actions. So here's how today's event will work. I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves and describe a little bit how they came to this discussion of EDI in their personal or professional paths. And then we'll go through a few rounds of asking, what does EDI mean to you, to each panelist? And also, what one thing, or maybe we won't limit it to quite just one thing, but will you or would you do to advance EDI at Carleton? And then I'd like to open the floor to questions. So attendees are welcome to ask a question through the chat. I will be able to see them, and as possible, I will put them to the panelists. So to get started, I will start with Michael. Michael, could you please introduce yourself and let us know how you came to this discussion?
Sure, thanks, Rowan, and thanks, Chuck, for inviting me. I should have asked this before. Do you want us to answer all three questions?
No, just the part about how did you
okay, sounds good.
Introduce yourself and how did you come to this discussion of EDI?
Sounds great. So my journey is a little bit circuitous. I started out in life as a professional and practicing lawyer, and enjoyed that very much. It was a way to develop a really rigorous set of skills. But I always was asking myself, where was this going to take me eventually? I didn't imagine myself actually progressing to become a judge, although that path was also open to me. So I wanted to know what I was going to do with this skill set. And as I was a board member of the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund at the time, I came to be very interested in some work that we were doing in schools, public schools across Canada, relating to diversity and inclusion, and saw the program that we were promoting as not only doing quite a bit of social good, but also presenting a very interesting business model. And so I had a sort of an epiphanal moment and decided to take a leap and transition from the formal practice of law into EDI consulting, which I did for a number of years across North America for large organizations in the public, not-for-profit, as well as for-profit sectors, from everything, including international law firms to healthcare, to human rights nonprofit advocacy groups, to financial services, multinational financial services organizations. So that was a thrilling ride for me, but eventually I wanted to understand, after you do this strategy and you do programming and do research for these groups as a sort of hired consultant, you have to move on to the next set of jobs, and you don't always get to see how that consulting work is actually implemented. So I had an opportunity to work at a university as an employee, and so saw a way to be able to implement some of all of this work as an in-house capacity as opposed to just an external consultant. And so that's sort of how I made my way to the post-secondary sector and where I've remained. I think it's actually a really fascinating space because it is an opportunity for the marriage of the practitioner with the researcher, with the theoretician, with the academic. And that is certainly, I think, two different kinds of areas at which some really important EDI work can be done. So it's great to be at Carleton.
Thank you, Michael. I'll hand it over to Inga now.
Here we go. Sorry about that. Trying to unmute myself. Okay, so a little bit about myself, I guess. So I actually came to Canada from a war-torn Bosnia and Herzegovina back in the 90s. And a few years after, I was able to attend University of Winnipeg, where I studied chemistry. Following that, I continued on with my postgraduate education in biochemistry at University of Windsor, and after that, spent several years doing my postdoctoral fellowships. So I had this great opportunity to be in STEM fields at different academic institutions. Actually, probably I changed 4 different institutions during this time. And I'm very much familiar with EDI issues. Anyways, following my research experience, I slightly shifted career choices and continued with research administration, the position which now I hold for 10 years. And basically how I come about EDI, I was always a big fan on EDI topics, and I followed with passion different reports generated by funding agencies on, it was mainly initially about gender imbalance, especially in STEM fields. Later, later on in my current role, I basically support research enterprise in the Faculty of Science. I provide advice to professors on their grant applications. Recently, actually 2 years ago, there was a significant push from the highest federal level that came first in the report from Canada Research Coordinating Committee that identified EDI as a national priority in research ecosystem. So this basically led to some specific actions that had to be implemented at the federal level, and our major funding agency, which I will be referring to probably for research in natural sciences and engineering, NSERC, has basically changed the way they evaluate applications, and now EDI has become basically a major component of training of personnel, mentoring, researcher excellence, as well as research design. So I see EDI through research lens. I guess that's mainly what my contribution today is going to be. Thanks, Rowan.
Thanks, Inga. I'll pass it over to Sarah.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So my name is Sarah Vanko. I'm in my 5th year of neuroscience and biology at Carleton. I'm just finishing up my undergrad this year. I'm also the Vice President Internal for the Carleton Science Student Society. I kind of came into the EDI conversation throughout just the university experience. So like many other students on campus, I have a very diverse group of friends that I think all deserve to have the same opportunities as myself and other privileged students and people. So through that journey, I started out with the Science Student Society as an equity officer, and also worked with a not-for-profit cancer immunotherapy network called BioCanRx, where I did a diversity work with them. So that was a lot about looking at the network as a whole and seeing who was there and what experiences they had gone through, especially in the translational pipeline of research, going from like very early on research up until clinical trials, and who are those people doing the research. So it was more for them. A lot of what I'm trying to do now is just get students involved in the EDI conversation, either through specific equity trainings or just sharing resources and making sure everyone is informed.
Super, thanks so much, Sarah. Gahande.
Gahande Yujat, Sakskare Wake Ni I Kanyakahaga, Newanjoto, Watkunoradun Danazawako. My name is Gahande Horn Miller, and I'm Kanyakahaga, also known as Mohawk, from Gahnawage. I have currently taken up the position of Assistant Vice President Indigenous Initiatives, and this ties in directly to my work by virtue of first going through the university education system as a student with no Indigenous faculty. I've never had Indigenous faculty teach me, which speaks to my work now, working towards implementing Carleton's Kinamagwin 41 calls to action. And so it comes out of my experiences as a student through my undergrad into my graduate studies, and witnessing the kinds of issues that Indigenous students face as an absolute minority in the classroom, but also when we the lack of knowledge about and understanding about the the culture and the history of our people on Turtle Island. And so, you know, and having to also be the one, oftentimes in most cases, be the one to answer questions on behalf of all Indigenous peoples. And so taking from those experiences, I've had the opportunity first in my graduate studies to begin consulting on implementing Indigenous studies programs, first at Concordia University, and then taking those experiences with understanding what it takes to bring forward Indigenous ideas into the university setting, not only as a graduate rep on that committee, but also as a student in this area, trying to work through a graduate degree from an Indigenous lens, and having to educate my advisors on what that means and how to implement it and how to do this in a respectful way. You know, based on all of those experiences, I brought them to Carleton. And since 2014, when I arrived, I began doing the work that I'm doing now, which is all about educating, about bringing voice, about accountability, research practice, ethical research practice, you know, bringing forward very difficult conversations that we've needed to have for quite some time. So with that, I was asked to be one of the co-chairs of the QSIC committee that did extensive consultations and brought forward the Kinemagoan report. So my experiences come out of my lived experience, and also my experiences as a student through this post-secondary system.
Thank you very much, Kahande. Jason, on to you.
Thanks, Ron. So hello, my name is Jason Heineck. I'm an instructor in computer science, and I'd have to say that I guess my journey towards EDI, it's been very incremental throughout my education. I also started in I was a physics major, and when I graduated, there was 6 of us in my undergrad class, which was actually big for my school, but 2 of them were women. So that was actually very, very odd. And in addition to that, we had a double major, a very good friend of mine. She was in physics chemistry. So for me, I didn't notice that there weren't a lot of women around, but certainly the faculty didn't do that. It never crossed my mind that that may have been an issue for my fellow students. But I'll just quickly mention 4 things that kind of brought me, you know, just small steps that brought me more aware of things that were happening. So one was as a graduate student, I'm proctoring an exam, and the question was about hockey and someone shooting a puck. And there was an international student, and they were very frustrated because they didn't know what a puck was. And I'm like, it didn't even clue into me, like, oh my goodness, like everyone knows what a puck is, right? Like, but this was something that held them back and caused them stress, and for no good reason. Later, when I started teaching myself, and you start asking, let's make these really cool assignment questions that are based on popular culture. And again, I thought this was great, but all I was doing was causing stress for people who didn't come from my circle of what popular culture was. English was my first language, so I could, it didn't dawn on me that this may have been an issue for my students. Well, until I did realize this. The third thing was really much more personal. I was dealing with about 4 or 5 grad students. We were working together on a mini course in the summer, and they were graduate students. I think there was 5 of them. 4 of them were male. 1 of them was a transgender female. And I had just in passing said, okay, are you guys ready to go, or something like this? And as I said it, I could just see the look in this young woman's eyes, and she just kind of murmured, like, we're not all guys. And it just it was gut wrenching, right? And I was just thinking, oh my goodness, like, I didn't mean anything by this, but small words really affect people. And, I just tried to be a little bit more aware that, just things that I may think are common and second nature, this actually may be offending someone or hurting them, or in some way, putting a hurdle up for them. So those are 3 big things. The last thing I'll mention is that, at some point, the student approached my partner, who also works at the university, and they were talking about like, oh, can we get something going for women in computer science for scholarships to let students know about this. So we talked about this a lot, and there were some recent hires in computer science. So we thought, this is a great time. There's a little bit of, there's more actual visible women. Maybe we should start this up. So she approached the faculty and they started this up. So I was kind of behind the scenes for a little while, and then kind of became more in front of it as a kind of a faculty member within the Women in Computer Science group at Carleton. And it just kind of progressed from that through my association with the Women in Computer Science group. So I'll stop there and leave it for someone else now.
Thanks a lot, Jason. So lots of different pathways all leading to this conversation of EDI. So now I'd like to go with the second round. I think we'll just go with the same order of questions just to keep it simple. So the next question is, what does EDI mean to you?
I think I'm first. Okay. I come at those words, equity, diversity, inclusion, as three separate words. I know that they are understood as a single phrase, and in many ways the words are used interchangeably. But I look back at the policy origins and the histories of these words, and they're actually quite distinct in their meanings. For me, equity, of course, really taking hold and coming into view under the guise of employment equity back in the 80s. And this idea, even more historical than that, of this idea of the courts of equity where judges were allowed to look at issues of fairness and not just what is in the black and white lettering of the law, but how do we actually do fairness and justice in a particular case? And that means taking into account the relative advantage or disadvantage that a person may have when they arrive upon a scene. I often use the sort of metaphor of someone who's entering a race, a very talented person entering a race with a bunch of competitors to their side who are also equally talented, but all of them have the best shoes on and you don't. The outcome is kind of predestined, notwithstanding your talent or your potential to be talented. So equity really talks about looking at relative advantages and disadvantages, talking about who has the power to allocate resources and critically reviewing that. And then diversity is really just a descriptor. It's not really a word that has a lot of theoretical content. What is the demographic composition of a given population at a given time? Could be used as a substitute for the word diversity. And then inclusion is as much more, at least historically, as a policy term, it was a reaction, to be honest, to the word equity. As equity came to be understood as forms of reverse discrimination, quite erroneously, by the way. And so equity was a means of bringing everyone back into the conversation as a policy construct. But in more modern context, we think of inclusion as the means by which everyone can come together, assuming and providing that there is respect and supports for those who come with disadvantages to that decision-making table, to that opportunity, that everyone can come together, that all perspectives, ways of knowing and being are valued and constructively contested. And I think that's the key component, that each of these things is engaged so that there is transference and curiosity across borders rather than within or at the centers of entities, so that we get that kind of intersecting and engagement that produces new ideas and results in innovation. That's what happens when you have inclusive environments. That's the real potential and value, both for the individuals who participate as well as for the group as a whole. But beyond those definitions, EDI also means for me, I think for those who may have an interest of either pursuing this alongside your study in STEM, EDI is a fantastic research area insofar as it is completely and wholly interdisciplinary in character. You have to think about science, actually. If you think about the pandemic, for example, that we're currently in, it is exposing disparities amongst populations that we never conceived of before. And so to be an epidemiologist in 2021 means also having the interdisciplinary capacity to understand all of these different effects on society. Otherwise, you're really actually not doing a very good job in epidemiology. So EDI means bringing all of these things together. You have to understand science, you have to have a curiosity about psychology and human behavior, behavioral economics, organizational theory. So EDI is really a fascinating site, I think, for people who are interested in the research side of things. And it's also an opportunity to really engage, really not only in local conversations, but national and international conversations. I've been lucky enough to be on the Universities Canada EDI advisory group and help them develop and deliver certain surveys and have conversations across the post-secondary sector in Canada and other opportunities internationally. So I just want to make a plug for EDI if anyone's interested in EDI, not just from an implementation standpoint in terms of making the faculty better, but from your own personal development as a way to see your own core subject matter in a completely new and revolutionary way.
Thank you, Michael. That was wonderful, bringing all those different lines of thinking together. Inga, on to you. What does EDI mean to you?
Okay, so I guess from my, I know the angle that I'm looking at, I'm a scientist and I believe in data, and I look at the data that we currently have on EDI in STEM, and we see significant gaps and biases. We see that our diverse population is not reflected by the presence of students and researchers and faculty members. We know that there are biases in peer review. There are publications about that. We know that there are biases in hiring practices. And I guess to me, EDI is like first of all, we need more data. The data is really what is lacking at present, that we can actually develop trends, that we can actually see where the issues are happening and how we can address them. Traditionally, I think the richest data set we have is about gender disparity, and that's something that NSERC has done probably for the last 15 years. They have generated several reports. Only since 2018, they actually started collecting reports in STEM with respect to other underrepresented groups. And actually now, for the first time, we have answers for academia that clearly state where do we stand with visible minorities, what's the percentage of faculty members across councils that identify themselves as Indigenous groups and visible minorities and people with disabilities. And this is really something that we need in order to identify what are the EDI challenges and actually work together collectively to address them at every level. I think I'm just going to stop there.
Wonderful perspectives. And Sarah, on to you. I imagine you have some other ones.
Thanks so much. I just want to echo what the previous panelists have said. They summed up a lot of it quite well and much more articulate than I probably am able to. But what I want to say is, like, going off of getting all that data for EDI and things like that, what EDI means to me is, yes, having those inclusive conversations and getting that data so we know what our challenges are and how we can start breaking those barriers. But that in itself, EDI means to me to start to get that, but then to start actually changing the system. Because we know that a lot of these systems that are in place in academics and in many other places, they were made to benefit a certain group of people. And I don't think we don't know that. But so for me, it's all about, once we have addressed those challenges and we start looking at that, we need to start looking at changing the system and changing the systems that are in place in academia so that more than just those privileged groups can benefit from them.
Thank you, Sarah. So we're going to come back to you on how to change the system on that next question. So Gahande.
I'm actually going to come at this from a little bit of a different perspective here. EDI means, when I think of EDI, I not only think about the fact that there are so few Indigenous students, Indigenous faculty in the STEM, but I also think about the content of the sciences and what is taught. Now, with the challenges that the earth is facing in terms of fires, in terms of flooding, health, COVID, multiple things that we are facing as a race, as a human race, as in the natural world. Indigenous people have a lot to teach about our own practices, our own knowledge about the environment, and how to work with the environment, how to caretake the environment, so that the natural medicines and the foods that come out of the environment benefit our people and keep us healthy and whole. As well, the practices, let's say, for example, around, burning, so that you don't have large scale fires. All of those different ways that my ancestors developed to keep our people and our communities healthy and strong and alive have a lot to show, the Western world, what is possible, what we can do to ensure that the coming faces, the next 7 generations, have an earth to stand upon, right? And I think, when I think about EDI, in there is the equity of knowledge, the equity of recognizing the voices and the knowledge of Indigenous peoples, the diversity. There is in Indigenous knowledge alone, and Indigenous communities alone, and nations and peoples, there is a diversity of voices and a diversity of knowledge. And inclusion is actually stopping and listening and listening to that. We have a process, a ceremony that we do, which speaks to this, and it's called the small condolence, and it's something that we use as the basis for any kind of interaction among our people, the Haudenosaunee, with other nations, and that is, it's about cleaning the eyes with the softest doe skin so that you can begin to see things clearly, cleaning the ears with a feather, with a eagle feather, so that when you stop and you listen, you can hear clearly, and then drinking the cleanest water so that there's nothing that obstructs your view, your voice. And so with those kinds of things in mind, you sit down across and with other people, and you begin to listen and begin to watch and begin to speak clearly with good intent and with honesty. And I think, when we begin to incorporate that kind of, those ways of doing and engaging with each other, then we can begin to hear each other and begin to learn from each other. And so that's what I want to contribute.
Thank you, Gahande. And Jason?
Thanks. So yeah, going last is not always best. So everyone has said some very wonderful things.
So Jason, maybe in the next round, we should reverse the order.
Oh, goodness. Sure. Okay. So I'll be very quick, though. I'll just say, for me, what does EDI mean? In very simple terms, we all have these hurdles in life, and for lots of reasons. And I think from the perspective of EDI, it's just about removing as many of these hurdles, these unnecessary hurdles, as we can, right? So I mean, I've had some hurdles, but other people have extra hurdles, for whatever reasons, right? Whether it's the way they talk or the way they don't talk, and these are just unnecessary. So I just think it's about leveling the playing field for everyone, and giving everyone a chance to have their voice heard and to participate. So I'll leave it with that. So there was so many good things said there.
Thanks, Jason. And actually, I am serious. Why don't we switch up the order for going to the one thing that you'll do to change EDI? And because of the time, and because I do want to get to the audience's question, I think I am going to suggest, because I know many of our panelists have a rich number of ideas of what they can and would do. So let's say, what one thing would you or will you do to advance EDI at Carleton?
Okay, sure. So I'll talk about something that I'm actually currently working on with my partner as well. So we're running a little outreach program, and we'll see that it's an indirect link to Carleton. So we have an outreach program in elementary school where we started last year to go out to grade 3 students to introduce them to computer science. And behind the scenes, right, so the real reason we wanted to do it was to try and normalize computer science to young girls before this divide happens, when they start thinking, oh, computer science isn't cool, science isn't cool. We'd like it to just be another normal thing. So that's what we're working on. And then, just recently I've had some nice discussions with a current undergrad student and talking about what EDI meant to her. And I'm also seeing that it's flipping. It's not just normalizing it for the girls, it's normalizing it for the boys as well, right? So I want the girls to be able to do whatever they want and not worry about it, but the boys shouldn't be pointing their finger when they're doing it as well, right? So I want it to be an education for everyone to just make whatever they want to be normal. So that's the contribution. It's not directly at Carleton now, but maybe in 10 years we may see some fruits of this. So that's what I'm going with for that. So thanks.
That's wonderful, Jason, and hopefully we'll see those numbers changing. So we do outreach visits in physics, and the students come into our labs, and then of course we recruit them. So, Gahande, what one thing would you do?
Well, I think there's lots of things I would do, and one thing that I am currently doing is developing a bundle with some colleagues on Indigenous conceptions of science and math, as a way for Indigenous students to begin to see themselves in what is being taught, as well as to assist with bridging Western knowledge with Indigenous knowledge. And I think out of there, the sciences will begin to see value in bringing Indigenous faculty in. So it all kind of leads one to the other. And hopefully we'll begin to see more Indigenous representation, teaching students, and bringing more Indigenous students in.
That's very important, and certainly something we're very aware of in science. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that coming about. Next up, Sarah.
Yeah, so I guess mine is a bit more from the perspective of still being a student. So a lot of what I'm trying to doing, especially with the Science Student Society we have at Carleton, is making sure that a number of science students are trained in what it means, or what equity and inclusivity and diversity means, on conscious bias training and other things like that. So we're making those programs available to our members, because I think at the forefront, you need to be informed on what these issues are, and some students still aren't. So we want to bring that forward. And then also just making sure that we're talking about specific issues that are happening in Canada and around the world, to make sure people know about specific things that are going on. We post this on social media just to make sure that students are informed on what's happening. So that's a lot of what I'm doing.
That's a lot, and that's certainly really important. So changing this awareness about EDI for the next generations of professionals, that is very important. Thank you. Inga, on to you.
Okay, I'm going to be quick as well. So I guess I would really take what now NSERC expects from individual professors to the next level, and have departments in STEM start asking, what are the barriers that we are seeing? These are often institution specific, field specific. Just because somebody else develops their plan or has data that indicating for certain gaps, we should have our own. And then once we know that, set targets and implement specific actions to actually remove these barriers. This will have to be done at the undergraduate level, as Gahande was saying, maybe introduce more friendly Indigenous options for science students, make them care about it. Similarly, at the graduate level, how can we make research initiatives appeal to students from underrepresented groups, make it so they care about it because of their cultural background, because of where they are coming from. At a faculty level, how can we increase participation of more diverse members? I mean, traditionally, we see that even as more female PhDs have been generated over the last decade, there is still gap at the faculty level. Should we be asking what is driving female scientists away from academia? I mean, these are just some questions that I think can be answered. I'll stop here.
Those are very good questions to answer, and certainly lots of things about what we need to talk about and take action on. And Michael, what one thing for you?
Well, I can't name one thing, so I'm going to cheat. I am going to talk a little bit about the EDI action plan, which my department has been socializing through the summer and into the fall, to the great response and energy of all of the faculties, including the Faculty of Science. And we are en route to having that plan endorsed as the university plan. And looking forward to working with partners across the university, our Indigenous colleagues, our advocates in accessibility, things like the Pauline Jewett Center for Gender Studies, all of these different EDI interested partners to work together on the plan to make sure that it becomes alive and that it is a plan to which everyone feels that they have a responsibility for executing. I wanted to talk about the plan because it represents at least 10 different thematic areas that interrelate, as opposed to just naming one. But it's my view that if we only focus on one thing at a time, we actually won't move the needle, because addressing one thing often leads to unintended consequences or resistance in other areas. And so unless we view all of these different components together and sequence them in a way that is coordinated, we're actually not going to make substantial progress. So I wholly agree with my colleagues. Things about curriculum and pedagogy are critical. And in fact, there was a panel last week during Inclusion Week on the neuroscience of inclusion, where a lot of the scientists brought forward research that talked about people who experience bigotry, sustained bigotry throughout their life in any of the different dimensions that we can talk about, actually experience trauma that impacts on their cognition. And so if the classroom becomes a site where that trauma continues, where the erasure of their being, their experience continues, then that continues to compress on their ability to learn. So the classroom is not a neutral site. It is either a place where people are harmed or where their ability to flourish is enhanced. And that for me was the one takeaway from that session, is that there's no neutral anymore. We have to understand about how EDI is a catalyst for improvement and enhanced outcomes for everyone. And think also about supports and research and leadership and data collection and culture and all of these pieces together and working together, we shall succeed. I'm done.
Thank you, Michael. We had to get to that. I know we did. So thank you to all the panelists for your wonderful answers to those questions. They show the level of experience, diversity, and insights seen across the Carleton community. So thank you so much. There are questions coming in from the audience. So I'm going to read them as they come in and possibly suggest someone to answer. But if another panelist wants to wave their arms around in the air and say, I have a good answer too, please do. So the first one is from Michel Barbeau. Can you explain actions that will be taken by the university to address the lack of EDI data? And I suspect that either Kahante or Michael would be good people to answer this.
I think Michael can answer this one better than I can.
Oh, I was just going to let you. I was going to let Kahante. I just spoke. Okay, well, to just quickly refer to the EDI action plan. So in terms of internal demographic data collection at Carleton, that is something that is an area where we need to move quite assertively and quickly. So currently for students, we only collect on the basis of gender internally. And in other areas, we rely on third-party consortiums or surveyors who, make certain inferences based on samples. It's highly inaccurate data. It relies too much on response bias, in my view. So we need to collect this data for ourselves at the student level and on a disaggregated basis. So that means not just collecting data about people who identify as visible minority or racialized or as Indigenous, but breaking those categories down to understand who is identifying as Inuit, who is identifying as First Nation, who is identifying as Métis, and of course under racialized, there are at least 12 different StatsCan categories, because the experience of a Chinese person is not necessarily the same as someone who comes from India, is not the same as someone who comes from the Philippines. So breaking all of those categories down on a disaggregated basis will be critical on the student side as well as on the employee side. And it's going to take some time to socialize, to make sure that everyone has a buy-in. But it is an area where the whole of the university sector is moving forward across Canada. And Carleton, if we wish to maintain a leadership orientation, will be moving quite assertively in this direction as well.
Thank you very much, Michael. The next question is from Justin Singer. It seems as though great strides might be made by guiding researchers to reflect on their own privilege from the beginning of their undergraduate studies. What is being done to do this at the institutional level now, and what improvements can we add? So I think different panelists could answer this, but actually, Sarah, as the students are doing some EDI training, does any of that consider privilege and reflecting on your own privilege?
Yeah,
as part of the training.
Yeah, that will definitely be part of the training, and reflecting on our own privileges as students. But I would say as a student, it would be beneficial to a lot of people if these sort of trainings or actual EDI material was more put into curriculums, especially at the undergrad level, because as when I was in first year, I never heard about it at all. It was just not talked about. And I think that goes for a lot of undergraduate students. So I think if there's more of a focus on it within our curriculum, that would be a lot more helpful. And I think it would help train the next generation to take those practices into their professional practice as well.
All right, thanks a lot, Sarah. And I'm pretty sure in the EDI action plan, part of the action plan is to do exactly that. So certainly. And we'll just keep moving forward as there are a number of questions here. So Heather Logan asks, when I was a young faculty member, I kept quiet about things that made me uncomfortable because I didn't want to make a fuss or be annoying. How can we create a safer environment for junior people to be able to speak up about what affects them in this way? So does anyone want to jump in and answer that one?
I think that it's happening right now with the new positions that have been implemented with assistant deans, EDI. I think that there you create much in the same vein of my own position, where people now can have a face, someone that they can approach to engage in discussions about things that they feel need to happen or are happening. I think that doing that for each department and faculty is a great idea, and I think we'll see a lot of good things come out of that. So really, it's about providing a safe space, really, to engage in the necessary discussions. Yeah.
Thank you. Another question from, so this one's from Rosalind Dakin. Role models are so important, and change in representation at the faculty level is slow. In the meantime, what kind of systemic institutional level changes or programs could Carleton develop to help more students from underrepresented groups see themselves in STEM roles?
I can answer that one.
Wonderful.
So I think that, I think a lot about how there are so few Indigenous students in STEM, and most Indigenous students that come into the post-secondary institutions are in the social sciences, right? For many reasons. I think there's a familiarity. They feel that it's most applicable to their desire to bring that knowledge and those degrees back to their community, to help their community. And they think, well, where and when and how can science help, right? So if we think about, programs where we have co-teaching models, where you co-teach, where our faculty in the STEMs co-teach with Indigenous knowledge keepers in a land-based learning environment about the different things, or even, in the classroom, right? Where they begin to show how you can bridge that knowledge. And also bring, upper level high school students into those environments where they begin to see the possibilities and begin to understand, how can I apply this in my community? Because that's really the foundation for an Indigenous student coming into the university, is how can I bring this knowledge back to my community to help my community grow and recover from the long-term impacts of colonization? What can I do to help? And so with that in mind, it's about showing the students in the high schools and even in the elementary level, how can they help if they go into the sciences? What are the hands-on things that they can do in their community that can help their community with this kind of knowledge? And I think once you begin to tap into that and you begin to find a way to show that to these students, you're going to see more of them coming into the STEMs and then eventually being professors, right?
Which is what we want.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, certainly. Yeah. Thank you. There's a question from Martha Mullally. Will we see targeted initiatives to target historically underrepresented groups in STEM at Carleton? I'm thinking of things like research scholarships specifically for Indigenous or Black students. This strikes me as critical because of the data that links early student research experiences with retention in STEM. So I'm sure Michael has ideas about this one. Maybe Jason too, maybe Inga? Jump in.
Absolutely. And maybe also Gahunde.
Yes.
Because I think that there are some scholarship reflections in the Kinamagon report as well, but certainly in the EDI action plan, we talk about recognizing EDI scholarship as it relates to any faculty, and new awards for those kinds of endeavors are going to be created under the plan. There's also a research cluster that is going to be under the auspices of Rafiq Gubran, the VP Research and International, that again will be open to any of the faculties to contribute. So there are going to be opportunities that are created, but those are not exhaustive. The faculties also can create their own scholarship opportunities as well, where they identify specific needs, and the plan is open to that kind of local innovation as well.
And are there funds from the Central EDI Action Plan to support these types of initiatives? Because that's what it often comes down to, right? Is the funds being available?
For the ones that are mentioned in the action plan, yes, those in many ways will be centrally funded, but for those at the local level, we'll probably look for some social entrepreneurship at the faculty level to support those.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, too, with the Indigenous focused, out of the Kinamagon report, we see that, we came to realize that more outreach needs to be made by the university's advancement in terms of looking for donors who would like to fund those kinds of scholarships. And so it's really talking with them and saying, okay, this is what we need. And we're at that stage now where we're trying to get things going with regards to Indigenous initiatives, really looking towards you know, the faculties and the departments in those faculties to say, okay, what are you doing in terms of the 41 calls to action? Which ones can you address? Okay. Funding, scholarships. Yes. Okay. So, you know, my next step will be to ask you, your faculty, your department, well, what are some of the things that you think you can do? And if one of them is, you know, saying, well, we'd like to work with you, or we'd like to work towards seeing more Indigenous students receive scholarships and funding to study the STEM, then let's do that. Because I think more voices are important, right, in these kinds of things. And so approaching advancement and saying, we want to see more students here. We have, you know, we have this initiative and this will to work towards this. Let's do this together. So that's part of it, right? And as well, we have the Indigenous Research Institute that we're beginning to develop, which I think as well is a place where these kinds of initiatives can be brought forward, but also nurtured, so that we can begin to see more of that in the future.
Thank you, Gahende. So we have a couple more questions, and I suspect after that we'll be really out of time. So anonymous attendee, what do you think would be a good response to people dismissing equity initiatives as political and wanting to focus solely on their research pursuits, not realizing the apolitical approach of maintaining the status quo can be very harmful? I find these types of people aren't knowingly propagating discrimination, but often aren't very responsive in their naivete and are very plentiful in science academia circles. So Inga, I'm actually wondering if you'd be up for going for this one.
Well, thanks, Rowan. I mean, well, anything related to research, as I mentioned before, we now see increased push from tri-agency, from NSERC about having people think about these issues, having people come up with plans, having professors serve as mentors to their trainees and teach them about EDI principles. This is not something we can run away from. It is right there. This is not about just writing successfully a paragraph in your grant application. This is about actually doing these actions, implementing these actions in your own research ecosystem. I think I'll just stop there.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on Inga there, if she'll let me. I completely agree. And I think it speaks to just a lack of awareness about how far the research in EDI has come, right? And then if you review it, a lot of these questions are already answered. The value is not so much in just appeasing certain, you know, advocacy groups. The value is in the research outcomes itself. And so people who make the argument that this is just politics actually haven't done the work to understand, and that's unfortunate. But we've got to be open-hearted and encourage them and direct them to that work, and so that we can bring them along to higher understanding. And it's in some ways it's a casualty of our sort of Western sort of fierce individualism, right? We do our research and we are in labs or we are in cubicles for, you know, 5-6 years on end writing these papers. And so we think that we've done it all ourselves, as though we're not actually also reading the work of other people, and that this work is actually cumulative in the same way that we're talking about EDI is bringing different perspectives together to be more creative and innovative. That it is exactly the same thing, but just understood in a different way. So we need to bring people along. Who haven't done yet the work that they should do, but we should make those opportunities available to them.
Thanks so much, Michael. So there's one other question here from Ben Davis Purcell. At the university professor level, especially in physics where I come from, we are overly represented by white males and need way more representation from these underrepresented groups that have been mentioned, including but not limited to women, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. In my opinion, an obvious first step to improve this is to preferentially select individuals from underrepresented groups for these positions. For example, if there are 2 finalists for a professor position who are closely ranked and one of them is a white man and the other is a woman, the woman should be hired. This seems easy to implement, but I have received pushback when sharing this with some of my white male peers. What are your thoughts on this? So Jason, are you willing to go for that one?
Sure, I guess I'll say a small thing about it. I guess it's really, I can understand. So when I was a student, I remember my very small physics department was hiring someone, and at my school, there wasn't a single female faculty member at any level, basically. In fact, there was only one female bathroom on our floor of the building, because it was, when it was made, only a secretary would use a female bathroom. Right, so this was just the mentality of how things were. So I can see how things kind of grow with it. So we were hiring someone, and as a student, we weren't involved, but we heard all the stories, and there was a lot of pushback because some of the final candidates, they were saying, "Oh, this is not fair. Why was she considered as a final candidate? I know there was much better candidates." Of course, we didn't know any of the situations, but I think it's just the easy kind of knee-jerk reaction that people typically have. It's like, oh, someone's getting special treatment, and they're not looking at the bigger picture. So it's, how do you explain to them, well, if they're, these candidates are relatively close together, there's no reason to really pick one or the other. Maybe there is a reason to pick, let's say, so again, in computer science, we also have this gender imbalance. Maybe it's better for the department itself, and maybe it's better for our students to hire a woman instead of a man that are equally qualified. But so that actually makes her more qualified because she's satisfying something more for the department than the man would, right? So I think they're missing this kind of key thing, that having this representation is such a benefit to everyone that actually adds something to their resume, to their CV, that most people just kind of dismiss, right? They're just like, oh, look at the number of publications. This one has 2 more publications than this person. Clearly they're better. Well, there's a lot more than publications here, right? And so I think that's maybe one way of trying to kind of ease into this. But I can totally see where this, I know that the pushback happens. I've seen it for many, many years at different places where, and a lot of it's an old boys club in a lot of areas, and it's really hard to shift out of it. But slowly, we're getting there.
And sorry, of course I've got to jump in again. Of course I completely agree with Jason. One of the questions we need to ask ourselves are, how are these qualifications and criteria actually being interpreted and applied? Because if the woman is coming with a slightly different perspective as represented by some of those papers, so shouldn't we go with a complementary view or a different perspective to enrich the thinking in our team rather than just hiring the same thing over and over again? And on top of that, Jason's point is well received, but also to Inga's point, that research actually shows how often diverse candidates or equity-seeking candidates meet and exceed the criteria and are actually more competitive than their counterparts who may be of the dominant culture, but yet who still do not receive the appointments. So the accounting for bias that we can now study and show isn't really taken into account of those with the view that, well, it's not really fair to white men anymore. So we need to have, again, a more open-hearted conversation about these and confront the data and be very critical about criteria that are being used that often simply perpetuate bias rather than dismantle it. We need to think much more critically about these questions than simply propagating and perpetuating the status quo.
Thank you very much. And assuming no one else has anything else to jump in and say, I want to thank our panelists for a rich and stimulating discussion. Thank you for bringing all your ideas and taking your time to be with us today. Thank everybody who came to this event. I hope you have been inspired to take action in some different ways and help make science a better place for everyone. And I want to invite you back to our next ACE EDI event. It will be December 1st. At 1 p.m. This is during the 16 days of action against gender-based violence. And Dr. Imogen Ko of Ryerson University will be speaking on uncomfortable truths and inclusive excellence in academic science, building the toolkit for change. So with that, possibly I'll close it over to Chuck or pass it over to Chuck, to close it out.
Oh, no, I thought you were doing a great job. No, thanks, everyone. Thank you, panelists. Thank you for all the people that attended and have sent in questions. As Rowan said, the conversation will continue. We always look forward to any feedback, comments, or anything that you have.
Thank you very much. Now go, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.